dancers, theater lovers that we are, the hush will be our indication to begin this evening. I'm Thomas Lax, Associate Curator of Media and Performance Art here at the Museum of Modern Art. I'm thrilled to be here with, on my left, Carlos Basualdo, Jenny Schlenska, and Xavier Leroy. Thank you all for being with us this evening. And thank all of you. Unfortunately, Catherine Wood will not be able to join us tonight. She's ill and was forbidden to get on a plane by her physician. So we're very sorry to not have her, but she's sent a full presentation to me. She was incredibly prepared and diligent, so I will ventriloquize her at one point. I can't promise to do her accurately, but I just want to say thank you to her and apologies on her behalf. So we're very happy to have you here for the second of our performance fora of this year. And this truly is the result of not only the collaboration of these thinkers to my left, but also of the entire Department of Media and Performance Art. Anna Yanevsky, Stuart Comer, Martha Joseph, Sogata Chakravorty, and Kathy Hallbreich, who together, we've been thinking about a set of questions over the last year related to the kind of ongoing commitment that we have in the museum and our department to thinking through the question of the place of performance and in particularly dance within the larger program. And most of you received a set of questions, I believe, that was sent out by myself in anticipation of tonight's event. If not, they were kind of long and, I'll make them a little more succinct today. Effectively, I think the question that we're asking is about the status of history. Within this conversation around the place of dance, what we're calling choreographing exhibitions, the status of history is one that I guess as a good feminist, I come to every time I rethink what we're doing. What is the set of relations that are put into motion, specifically by dance, movement, choreography, and those are all obviously different terms, but how do they claim historical categories in different ways? And what are the sets of relationships between artists, between works of art, that exhibitions in particular propose? And what might they reveal to us? So I'm going to give a very short, incomplete, and partial history of the category that we're describing tonight, choreographing exhibitions, looking at effectively the history of the appearance of dance within museum exhibitions in particular. And we can argue about whether that's even an important location or site to think about these questions at all. But since here we are inside of one, and thanks to our colleagues in the library here at the museum for hosting us, seems like a fitting place to begin. So I'll start actually with a blank. So the first image that you don't see is Tino Segal's "Instead of Allowing Something to Rise Up to Your Face, Dancing Bruce and Dan and Other Things" from 2000, which in many ways is a kind of a shifting work, a pivotal work. It's the first work by Segal in which, as many of you might already know, dancers cite Bruce Nauman and Dan Graham's work from the 60s and 70s, and a human figure appears on the floor. It's a work that in many ways kind of claims a space of modern sculpture in that it's on view all day, every day, and available to be seen in the round. And interestingly, it was made in 2000 and acquired by several institutions, the Walker Art Center and the Stedelijk in 2005. And so we can begin to think about the kind of history of value and valuation that those dates mark between 2000 and 2005. And it was recently included in Segal's retrospective at the Stedelijk, which was on view last year for 12 months, with a kind of new work on view for each of those months. So starting with that as a kind of monographic turn, and moving to MOVE, Choreographing You, Art and Dance since the 1960s, which was in 2011, so fast forwarding about a decade, to the Hayward Gallery in London, an exhibition curated by Stephanie Rosenthal. And here you see Mike Kelly's test room containing multiple stimuli known to elicit curiosity and manipulatory responses. And from the look of this image, which was on the cover of the catalog and kind of chief press image that was used over and over, you see by the choice of a visual artist who one might not necessarily immediately associate with the history of dance and choreography, a kind of interest in thinking through the kind of collaborative space between the visual arts and dance. It was an exhibition, as many of you already know, that brought together pivotal figures from the 1950s and 60s in new dance, Simone Forti, Anna Halperin, Yvonne Rainer, Trisha Brown, with a number of figures coming from the visual arts, interested in making work with dancers, Janine Antoni, Mike Kelly, Tanya Bruguera, and really activated the idea of participation. So as visitors to the show could experience, one could physically move through a William Forsythe installation, and one was asked to kind of be not only an active viewer physically, but also to participate in completing the work itself. Here you see an installation shot from Dance Draw, an exhibition made the same year in 2011 at the ICA in Boston by the curator Helen Molesworth, and an image of Trisha Brown's Floor to the Forest. And I point to this exhibition as a kind of, let's say, American counterpart to Move Choreographing You. And in particular, because of the relationship of this show to a couple of other shows. These are all kind of paradigmatic examples. One might think about this show in terms of its relationship to online, an exhibition that happened here at the Museum of Modern Art, organized by Connie Butler and Catherine DeZager. And in that show made the same year, Catherine Lord, the artist, remarked that there were a startling number of works that evidence an almost stereotypically feminine modesty of means, refusing hyperbole. They occupy space through small, often comedic vocabularies of plays and puns. And so already we have a kind of appearance of one subject formation early on in the kind of history of these exhibitions. Next, I'm giving you a sneak peek of Carlos's Dancing Around the Bride. Carlos Basualdo, of course, the Keith L. and Catherine Sachs Senior Curator of Contemporary Art at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And this is an exhibition that was organized in 2011 at the PMA and traveled to the Barbican in London. And the exhibition we'll hear much more about, but two things to point out that I think are quite important to tonight's conversation is, first of all, the kind of intervention, I'll call it, by Philippe Perrineau, who was named as the metteur en scène, whose kind of marquee inaugurates the exhibition as you kind of walk into the space. And another thing that we don't see, but we can imagine or kind of impute onto the image, is the sound of breath and footfalls that would appear on the right when no dancer was there. So thinking through the way in which absence is staged and the kind of intervention of an artist into the kind of narration of history, I think is a true contribution of this exhibition. On the left, you see Walk Around Time, of course, Jasper John's set from Merce Cunningham's work of the same name. And as the title implies, and as my invocation of the kind of idea of the passage of time asks, what does it mean for this exhibition that began, as I understand it, really with the kind of dissolution of the Cunningham Company, with this kind of mark of finitude or finality, a kind of maybe even melancholy, I'll ask, to kind of have that be the kind of starting point for thinking about these questions of liveness and presence. Next, sadly, another melancholic moment slightly. The Catherine's two installation shots from her Yvonne Rainer Dance Works, which was at Raven Row in London in 2014, and I'll just read from her fantastic remarks that she had prepared. So the exhibition presented Rainer's dance works from circa 1961 to 1972, alongside other aspects of her practice, theoretical and lyrical writing, sketches and scores, photographs of performances, documentary and experimental films, and an audio recording of one of her early performance lectures. Each day, a 45-minute dance program was performed 4 times in the central space at Raven Row. The program included Trio A from 66 and Chair Pillow from 69, as well as the UK premieres of the very rarely seen Talking Solo and Diagonal from both 1963. The large window to the street at the back of the gallery, only just was visible in these photographs, was a gift. Opening it up gave us a backdrop of a full-time passing pedestrian choreography every day, somehow situating the dance in the city perfectly. From there, I'll move on to Xavier Leroy's retrospective, which was originally organized by the Foundation Tapies in Barcelona at the invitation of Lawrence Russell, and beautifully organized at MoMA PS1 by Jenny Schlenska, associate curator there. And I'll let the two of them speak more about it in a minute, but I think in terms of the history of this institution, MoMA and MoMA PS1's engagement with thinking about the way in which oral testimony, sculpture, image making, and the video loop might be conceptual ways to think through the organization of a retrospective in particular, is one that has been deeply informed by this project here. Slightly earlier at MoMA, the Musée de la Danse, 3 Collective Gestures in 2013 by the artist choreographer Boris Sharmatz was organized by Anna Yanevsky. And over 3 weeks, Sharmatz brought his interest in thinking about the space of the museum as a kind of conceptual and civic frame for the history of dance here to MoMA, with 3 works: 20 Dancers for the 20th Century, in which 20 dancers performed seminal solos from the past century across the museum. Levée de Conflit, which you see on the left here, performed in the Marin Atrium during museum hours, consisting of 25 movements performed continuously by 24 dancers. And on the right, Flipbook, in which Sharmatz revisits David Vaughan's book 50 Years, which charts Cunningham's choreography through a half a century. And so I think in these examples, you then again see the kind of figure of relations, whether they're paternal relations, whether they're sibling relations. You see a kind of set of genealogies formed directly in the stakes of exhibition making. Finally, still here close to the museum, Maria Hasabi's Plastic, which just closed a week and 2 days ago, which Martha and I had the pleasure of working on with Maria. And this exhibition, as many of you already know, was cited throughout the museum, in the atrium, in the staircase leading up to the atrium, as well as the kind of peekaboo window that you see on the right here, in which a total of 17 dancers, I don't need that, don't worry about it, Carlos. In which a total of 17 dancers over the course of 29 days performed for a 2 to 4 hour loop of choreographed movement. And there's a fantastic quote by Adrian Heathfield about the kind of nature of choreography that I think in many ways gets to the heart of what this exhibition was asking. He says, choreography is the impossible attempt to remove the paradox of the stillness inside movement. I'll read that again, and for those of you who saw Hasabi's work, you know that the idea of the tension between stillness and movement is at the center and core of that work. So Heathfield says, choreography is the impossible attempt to remove the paradox of the stillness inside movement. So why choreography tonight? We decided to call tonight Choreographing Exhibitions. We could have called it a lot of things. I guess moving exhibitions, dancing exhibitions don't quite sound as good. So maybe that's partially why. But I wanted to offer a few working definitions of choreography from some of the folks who are in this room to think through what the stakes of talking about choreography in particular are. One is a kind of working definition that is between moving and writing inscription by André Lepecki. So kind of looking at the way in which ideas of command and demand by a score or any form of inscription itself already place us into networks of power, into relationships of power with one another. The second is a kind of anticipation, since there is something that might exist before and after a live act. There's both a kind of anticipation of and a kind of trace of a relationship to somebody else, so that this kind of mode of address is part of what choreography might name. And lastly, that choreography is a specific invocation of time, in the sense that relationships of genealogy, of claiming one's own history, don't only happen through the time of watching and listening to a performance, but also themselves are marked through the act of organizing objects in relationship to one another. So those are a few working definitions. And with those questions, I will pass the mic to Carlos, who I believe will start with a video.
We have a short, thank you very much. I think we show the short film. So to me, that was a little bit like the end of a complicated journey. And what I'm going to tell you a little bit about is the complications. This show didn't start. It was the title was Dancing Around the Broad Cage, Cunningham, Jones, Rauschenberg, and Duchamp. The show didn't start with the desire of show performance. That was not in my mind. The show started because these 5 people have a long history with the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and I felt compelled to pay homage to that history, and that posed, a series of problems, and the show was. I believe that any exhibition is, at least one problem or a series of problems, and being a curator is trying to navigate through those problems and try to solve those problems, and sometimes you find other problems and you keep trying to solve them. So the point of departure, the problem that was the point of departure was, can we do a show that is a show about the relationship between these people and the relationship between these people and the Philadelphia Museum of Art? And can we do a show about the role that the Philadelphia Museum of Art played in the relationship between these people? So that's one way of saying it. I could say it differently. I could say that the show was about being together. What does it mean to be with another? And you can decline that in any way in which you'd like. You can say, what does it mean for the museum to absorb foreign bodies that sweat, that need a certain temperature and drink water? You can say what it means for a sculpture to be in front of something, of a script, a musical script. For what does it means for a viewer to be in front of a dancer. You can think of it politically. I think it's an urgent question. It's always been an urgent question. It's like so urgent I cannot even really start to think about it, but it's always been an urgent question for me. What does it mean to be with another? I actually thought of it as a political question, and I thought that it was a political question that had a very specific answer in this country in the late 1950s and early 1960s, and that, my presumption was that we had not really remembered it, that we kind of sort of, we remember it, but we don't really, and I wanted to see if we could rehearse it again. The antecedent for that was a show that I had curated a few years before, which was called Tropicalia, a revolution in Brazilian culture, which was about Brazil in the 1960s. I think that in Brazil in the 1960s, that question was posed and responded very effectively from people coming from different disciplines. And I thought that there could be a parallel in this moment in American culture. And so I wanted to basically do a show about that. At the beginning, I started working with Jones, Rauschenberg, Cage, and Cunningham, and I had the very silly presumption that I could do a show about these four people. Of course, it's impossible, right? I mean, they all live very long lives. Jasper is still alive and doing wonderful work, as you know, and it's a little bit like then I felt like I was in a little sailboat trying to navigate the Pacific Ocean, and I didn't really find any place where to begin and where to end. The museum, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, for several decades had a gallery devoted to the work of Jasper Johns. And there's a long relationship, a long history with Johns at the museum. Ander Noncourt, who was the former director of the museum for more than 25 years, was a member of the board of the Cunningham company, and she was also one of the funders of the Cage Trust. She was very close to Cage, to both John Cage and Merce Cunningham. So, you know, the institutional history was there, and so it seemed natural to work with them. But of course, then again, it was a question of how to map this. And it was really hard. I didn't have any idea how to map it. And then, of course, you know, I just realized that the answer had always been in front of me, which was Duchamp. Of course, we do have, you know, the large glass, and Duchamp had been incredibly important for these people. And I think that these people had been incredibly important for Duchamp. In the sense that the Duchamp that we know, it's in many ways, you know, it's a product of the image of Duchamp. I don't want to say, it's a little bit more complex than that, of that these people made us familiar with. You know, Duchamp up until 1959 was really, I mean, especially in the 50s, Duchamp was a very, it was almost like a secret, you know, whispered by some people, some conoscenti, and of course, you know, those people knew how important he was, but you know, besides that, his work was not very well known, and certainly, you know, he was thought of as somebody who had done this strange painting called La Marie mise à nu par sa célibataire même, and he had left it unfinished started in 1915, left it unfinished in 1923, and then he had dedicated himself to play chess. You know, it was the moment of the silence of Duchamp. The Duchamp of the ready-mades came later, and one of the reasons why we started paying, as a culture, started paying more attention to Duchamp was because these people, Jones and Rauschenberg, and then Cage, and then Cunningham, pointed our attention to his work. So the exhibition was about the relationship between them, but it was about, then I realized the relationship between them and Duchamp, and it didn't go in one way. It went in several ways at the same time. So from the first time, there was a question of a certain reversibility of time that was the most difficult question, right? The other difficult question was that they produced different kinds of objects and events, right? And it was a requirement to show them together. The exhibition had to be able to accommodate dance. It had to be able to accommodate sound. I mean, Cage did much more than sound. He was a thinker that sound was the medium of his thought, but it needed to accommodate his work as a composer. And then Jasper and Rauschenberg objects, but also objects that were produced as art, and other objects that had a much more complicated status, like the set for Walk Around Time that was a set, but now it's really considered a work of art, or the set for Minutia that, you know, was Rauschenberg did as a set, but then became a work of art, one of his first combines, and so forth. So there was a certain permeability and fluidity between all these different categories of objects, and of course they have a different presence, right, and a different, I would even say, status. And so the question was, how do we combine them? That was the main problem. How do I combine all these different categories of objects, some of which I don't even sure what they are? And I started, with Erika Battle, who was a co-curator and a great partner in crime. We started looking at different shows here and there, and we were together in London and saw the show of the Ballet Russe at the V&A. And that is, a very clear answer to the problem, right? I mean, shows like that. But there's been so many shows like that in which you show a film and you show the costumes. They're usually in those ugly mannequins, sometimes the mannequins as well. And then you show the scripts and some little works of art. And, it's that enormous effort to translate all those different forms into one visual system, right? It's always about translation in one way or another, but that is the most brutal form of translation. And then everything is like compressed in time, right? Because the translation also includes a different time, a different timing, and a different time as a reference, and objectualize. And we all familiar with these shows, and that we don't learn anything about the dance or the music or anything at all. And so we were, there was very beautiful material in the show, but we were horrified, and we felt even, more lost. And then we saw that there was a show of Philippe Arreno at the Serpentine, and I had remembered that Hans-Ulrich Obrist curated a wonderful show of Philippe called Alien Seasons at the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris. I think it was in the year 2000 or something. Karen Marda, who knows both Philippe and Hans, will be able to tell us if but I remember a room in particular which was interesting because it was just a white room, and you would enter the room, and then the blinds would come down, and there would be a white painting, like a Rauschenberg white painting, and on the white painting there will be a projection that would last 4 minutes and 33 seconds of a landscape, I seem to believe, and then it will end, and the room will be dark, and then the curtains will go up, and then everything will be, will be white again, and it will be a room showing a painting. So it was a room showing a painting that then became a projection screen, and that then became, simply an empty, dark space that was in some way an homage to one of John Cage's compositions. And so what I remember thinking about that when I was looking at Philippe's show at the Serpentine was that through manipulating mechanical processes, through inscribing a certain duration, this is a very loaded term, but inscribing time and a certain the passing of time in the experience of the exhibition, he had accomplished to show different categories of objects. So I saw the Serpentine show. It was very much connected to that earlier, to the earlier experience. And I reached out to Hans, and I said, what if I invite Philippe to help me out with this? And he said, call him up, and I called him up, and I said, would you help me out? But the truth is that the artists are these 5 people, and if I would invite you as an artist, then I would really do what you say, because you're the artist and I'm a curator and I'm supposed to do what you say. But I cannot invite you as an artist because there's already 5 artists. So you will have to work for the show, and you will have to accept that I have the last word here. I mean, your role, your position here will not be the position of an artist. And so he said, oh yes, that's perfect. I'm happy to work with this material. And of course we didn't have a name for him. Because he was not an artist, and he's not there, right? So we decided that we were going to call him Metteur en Scène. I don't know what it means. It was just something that we came up with to stabilize something that was not stable. But I guess it was perfect because nothing was really stable, and the show was about that lack of stability. So what I will show you quickly, because I'm talking too much, is this? I will show you quickly what his interventions were in the show and how, what at least the desired effect was. and the interesting thing about his interventions was that they were not done as works of art. It's not that he inserted works of art in the show. He just did these things, and we didn't have a name for them. And I think he's been dealing with that lack of name since then, sometimes very productively. So the first thing was that you would enter, this is the great stair hall of the museum, and you will see a piano on plexi sort of pedestal, and the piano would be playing, I think it was music from Marcel Duchamp. It was a cage composition that we recorded. That's a this clavier piano that in which you record, it records movement. So Margaret Leng Tang, who was a composer who worked really closely with Cage, came, prepared the piano, and recorded that. So when you would enter that space, you will hear periodically the piano playing, right? And what was, I think, very beautiful was that the piano, if you would look up in the museum, you would see a work by Alexander Calder called The Ghost. And the piano was almost like played by a ghost. And this show was about ghosts, you know, and it was about absence of those artists. The only one who is still alive is Jasper Johns. So when I said the relationship with the other, it's also the relationship between the living and the dead. And most often when we go to an exhibition, that is, you know, the founding relationship. We are relating to people who made those works and are no longer with us. So it is about ghosts, and I think that set the tone for the rest of the show. Then, of course, the show is a spectacle. All shows are a spectacle. There are different kinds of spectacle, but they are a spectacle, and I mean it in all possible senses of the word. And we wanted to assume that from the beginning. And so the marquee was, and Philippe has been doing marquees for a long time, was perfect because it indicated that what you would see was a spectacle. A spectacle is something that happens in time, and that what you would see happened in time. The marquee, and you see that the posters were kind of like the posters of, a movie theater, or, I mean, we wanted to give that sort of character, like this was a play, this was about playing in so many ways. Playing is such an important part of Duchamp work. There would be no work without play, and, the boundaries of what is play and what is work are always in question in terms of Duchamp. Now, the marquee would be lit differently in relationship to what was happening inside. You didn't need to know that, but I think that if you wanted to look at, to look at it more closely, and you would realize that it went crazy when the dancers were on stage, and then did other things when other elements, where the music was playing and so forth. So the marquee give you a visual indication of what was happening inside the show. The first section of the show was about the bride. I'm not going to tell you in detail what the works that were there, but it was mostly, I think that the most interesting element was Philippe's design for the bride. It's a painting that Duchamp did in 1912 that provided the basis for the large glass, and she was floating on a plexiglass, so you could actually see her back. Philippe says that it was like, being able to lift her skirt and look under the skirt. In some ways, you could see her history, because, of course, in the back of the painting is a register of where the painting had been shown. The second part of the show, of that same corridor, was installed with works that dealt with chance in one way or another. And what I want to point out is that you see a little, right next to the musical script, you see a square that is lit. And what that indicates is that the music corresponding to that script is playing. So those were labels that became lit when the corresponding sound was heard in the space. So it was a way of indicating that you were actually experiencing what you were looking at. The main space had another piano playing a different work by John Cage, and then it was surrounded by different works by the artists. Some of them, as I said, works that are more canonically considered paintings and sculptures, and others that were in between. There was a very big dance floor, but it really was a pedestal. That's why I started by showing the film, because what happens in Walk Around Time is that the set is actually moved by the dancers. And so by moving the set, they indicate that the set is conceived as a prop, right? But in this case, the set cannot be touched. And so, because it's really, it's displayed on a dance floor, but it's really displayed on a pedestal. And so the solution was to use a crane, like theater, to lift the set. I'm very thankful to the Walker Art Center and to Olga Viso for allowing us this completely crazy experiment. It did work very well and we didn't damage it. But I have to say that every time that the set was lifted, and it was lifted for each performance, so many, many times my breath was like, I had to hold my breath. But the set was lifted so dancers could come in and dance. And as you said, the question about the dancers was a difficult question because I felt, and I still feel strongly, that the work of Merce resides in the body of his dancers. And the company was going to dance after Merce died. It was going to dance for 2 years. It's going to be dissolved. And there was no appeal to retain the company. And so 9 dancers of the company dancing around the bride. And it was a miracle because I think that then, now some of those dancers are not dancing anymore. They just went through the world. But we managed to, the foundation, the Cunningham Trust was cooperative enough, so it allowed us to do that. We hired a stager who was one of the dancers, and it was a very complex process of basically choreographing the different fragments that they were dancing and longer works as well. But they dance throughout the exhibition. The big question, because we didn't have enough money to have them dancing every day, and the big question that everybody in the museum asked us was, okay, so what will happen when the dancers are not around? And I looked at Philippe and said, what will happen? And Philippe said, well, we'll have ghost dancers. And so what Philippe did was we recorded the dancers in a studio in New York, and we record them so with positional speakers. So then that dance floor has speakers below. And so when the dancers were not there, you could hear the dancers dancing. And it was kind of amazing, really, because you could even hear their breath and their positions, and the dance floor vibrated with them. And so when some of the real dancers were dancing with the ghost dancers, they said that at times they felt that they were dancing with people. So suddenly the ghost player, the ghost piano duplicated in the ghost dancers, and the ghost dancers were dancing with the living dancers at many times, because the entire sound system was regulated by a computer program that also determined the position. You see those at the very back of that of those grades. The grades were basically duplicated. Is our grade stair hall, what you saw at the beginning, is like the ghost or the echo of that grade stair. So it replicated that feature of architecture. And at the back there are 3 windows. Now this is a temporary exhibition space, and windows are supposed to be shut down. But Philippe said very early on 2 things that were very, very clear and precise about the show. He said, first, we need to show everything as if it would be a work of art. He said, we need to show everything with the precision and the attention that we give to a work of art. Every single gesture needs to be underlined in that way. Not to give it the category of the work of art, but so it could demand the attention that the work of art demands. And second, he said, the works of these 5 people is very fragile. It's inherently fragile. Not only is physically fragile, materially fragile, but it's also, fundamentally fragile. And so we need to show that fragility. And in order to do that, he said, what I would like to do, and it's also about life so much, and that fragility is inherent in life. Life is fragile. And so he said, at a certain point, what I would like to happen is that the museum goes away. That you're outside. You're outside in the street. And there's no museum. There's no walls anymore. Sounded wonderful, right? So how are you going to do that? And we look at the 3 windows and we said, well, we'll open the windows. There will be like the movements of 433. 433, the silent piece by Cage, have 3 movements, so they will be open sequentially for the same duration of the 3 movements. And we will let the sounds from outside, pour and flow inside the exhibition space. And that sound, that was absolutely wonderful. But as I realized, Philippe really had no idea how to do it. And he found out that it was possible to make sound, because you needed to make sound move in the space. And one thing, I think sound move in the space is easy. Like you put, one speaker there, another speaker there, but it really is not. In order to make sound move in the space, it's you actually need a system that at that time, and now there's better systems, was called Dimitri. It's what the Disney uses in their amusement parks, and works. You need to hire a programmer, so the programmer programs basically the computer, so it makes the sound travel in the space. So we came to know that 2 months before the show, and so we did it somewhat, but the effect was incredible because the sound that you heard at the beginning was the sound from outside the building. We used a combination of recorded sound and microphones, so there would be an element of chance. And every time, every cycle, the cycle of the entire program lasted for 70 minutes. Every time there would be a moment in which the curtains would raise. We timed that with the position of the sun, so it wouldn't hit directly the objects. The registrars were, you can imagine, so happy with all of this. They were like, you can imagine, Kathy, how the registrars, they looked at me every time that I came into the building. But water, living bodies, we have to raise the temperature for the dancers. And in any case, I'm still here. And so basically that was the last intervention that Philippe did. So those are some of the views of the objects in the show. The objects, as you can imagine, were very wonderful, very valuable, came from different parts of the world, so we needed to have the indemnity for the objects, and that made it a little bit. Those are little, curatorial details, but I consider them very conceptually important for the show. I think that those are the substance of it. And the last room was about chess. That was so important for all of them, so it was a more conventional exhibition space. I will show you the last iteration of the dance, and then I will leave you with the rest of our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Just want to ask one question before we move on, which is, you so beautifully described the set of relationships that you began to think through as a question of being together. And these 5 figures, the kinds of relationships that they had were, one could say at once, kind of Duchamp to, the kind of generations after him, parental or fatherly, and then between them, sexual in terms of their own intimacy. And there was a way in which in the show, it was all of those things, but yet something altogether different. There was a way in which sexuality wasn't just about a biographic way that people might have been together, but actually about the kind of arrangement of the objects as kind of assemblages that had an erotics to them. And as
I think there was also the erotics of Philippe relating to them, no? And because I believe that they changed his work very dramatically. I think that, he really entered that system, and the system, influenced the way in which he thought about his work and still does. So it was about entering in relationship, and of course there was, what gathered them was a profound love for each other that still exists. Jones, I think that, still loves very deeply these people, right? So an aspect of being together was being with love, but being with the ghost. Yeah.
Super. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. um, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jenny Schlensker, Associate Curator at MoMA PS1, and I had the great pleasure to organize the New York City iteration of Retrospective by Xavier Leroy. And we thought we'd start with the question, who in the room has seen the exhibition? So about half. Okay, so we'll try. It's fairly complex, but we'll try to make it palpable. Who in the room has performed in the exhibition? Oh no. Okay. Well, there's Alex Sloan in the back. She organized with me the exhibition, so maybe you can help us too. So Xavier will start showing a little clip from the exhibition, and you feel free to. Yeah.
Jenny, you can push spacebar on the computer behind you.
Yeah.
Savi, do you want to explain what this space is?
Yeah, so that's the images of you saw were from the first room you come in when you come in the exhibition, and this is the second room where now it's accelerated. The two performers are in this room, and they have the task they have is to welcome the visitor coming in the room and proposing them to engage a conversation. And when one is taking care of that, the other one can. And this is the third room, which is normally very, very dark. You don't see nothing, but of course, for the video, there was a long exposure to make it possible to see. These are dummies. They are not people. They are human figures, not alive.
To those people in the room who haven't seen the show, how would you, if possible, very simply explain what the exhibition is or does?
Maybe to add on the image, the first room have actually three kind of actions, three categories of actions that are performed by the four performers who are in that first room. And on one station, something you saw a little bit of one posture, one station, the one performer would always perform what we call an immobility. So something that stands for everything that usually in an exhibition space is there forever, not moving. So any objects, sculptures, painting, any installation, things that are there without changing somehow. And on the other side of the room, there is another category of activity that we do that stands for everything that are in exhibition spaces and are there by means of repetition. So there you have this. I now think about these machines from Duchamp, for example. It's there, but it's changing. But there is a repetition. It's a loop. But of course, most seen are the video loops. So the video is always there in the exhibition, and in order to be always there, the beginning of the loop is the end of the loop is a beginning, and the end, and by means of repetition, this thing will be present all the time in the space. And the other activity that the performers do, and you could get a little bit of this, is something that is more and more present in exhibition spaces, but also come with this problem of it's there, but it cannot be there all the time because it has a beginning and an end. So it involves a duration that needs to be seen from the beginning to the end. So not like a loop that you can see at any time and look at as many times as you want. And these are so stories, narratives that are developed by each of the performers that we call individual retrospectives, and they are built by the association of movements that are taken from works I propose to use from my body of work, which are solo works, so that each performer choose what she or he wants to work with, and alternate with a speech or talk that is given to the visitor to who they address this whole story, which you could see from time to time when one of them was talking and telling something, which is their stories. So these three categories of activity are what is are in the first space, and something that was quite clear on the video, I think, was that come on top of this is that this presence is addressed to the visitor. So every time a new visitor comes in the space, in order to perform and make as a question that we are there all the time, but we are human beings, so we cannot transform ourselves totally into objects. We address and we do this for you, visitor coming in. So we have to to manifest this, which was manifested by this sound that you hear each time a person comes in, which would activate the whole system to make possible for the new visitor to feel that we do this for you, and then the whole thing goes into place where this whole activity happen. So this whole room was thought to try to think about these different times that that cannot come together in a way when you think about live human actions performed, and I come from the background of doing choreography in theater, so with a program, a beginning and an end. So this kind of times for the performer and for the spectator, and the other kind of times for the visitor of an exhibition and the object. So doing something live in a place which is usually for things not necessarily dead, but things that can stay infinitely or almost in the space, come with the question of how is that possible? There are different time, and that's what the system and the whole work tries to do, is to bring this idea that a present is always a construction of different times, not necessarily only from the different people present, which is also something that you can experience in the work as a visitor as you enter this story of the performer, but you also enter the listening of the other that are there, that might ask questions, that might come from different background. So there are all these different times also, but I think that it's very much driven by this times conditions that conventions produce on these two big different situation, social situation, which are the theater made for performance and the exhibition space, which is not made for performance. So by trying to overlap, bring these two things, hopefully the work does produce something that is bringing an idea of different sense of times at the same times, which are the construction of the present that you experience as a visitor, but also, and that's a very important aspect, as a performer, in order not to reduce the performer into an object that is there and maybe do something in repetition as a cycle. So in order to replace this presence, taking somehow the solution from video loops in a certain way. So that's what the first room tries to do, and the second room is reflecting on the different level of works that are involved when the performer work in an exhibition space and do all these things. So there was a desire to bring also visible this other kind of works that we are busy with when you work in performances. There is all the preparation, all research, looking for material, rehearsing, discussing with each other, and also the discussing with the public. So this second room is also called the archive room. So it's a place where you can see all the materials that have been used by each performers to make their stories, and also all the materials that we use to make all the movements that are pre-existing materials. So it's another idea of bringing time as like retrospective was very much used as this idea of looking looking before. And in this room, the two performers are there doing what they need to do, with the restriction that they have to welcome the visitor who come there and engage in a conversation that is not scripted like they can script their story in the first space where they tell a story that is can be told in different ways, but it's always the same story that they can change along the exhibition. That's another level of the time and its possible transformation when you use live. That's, I think, the power of doing something live in an exhibition over a long time, is that you can literally work on different ideas of transformation and the need or the resistance that we have as a transformation in these spaces, and the desire of seeing the original painting. So we can now go easy, see every paintings or word very easy, but we require this experience of the original, so something that is not transformed, but the live allow this transformation. So I think that's also an important parameter that this works with, and so this second room is about this, very shortly put together, and the third room is very dark space, contrary to the white cube that you go through the two first spaces. And in this room are these figures these dummies that you could see on the image now, that are gray, dressed in gray, and on a gray carpet, and you can almost not see them when you come in the room. It's too dark, but the time you will spend in the room will make them appear too. So that's another proposal of the experience. And by having seen the two other rooms where people literally come to you, go away, run, shout, talk, so are very alive, these objects, human figure, want to be alive by your presence. And if you stay long, there is another encounter that you make about the question of being there, and the movement, some idea about movement that are actually produced by maybe your breathing, looking at this person that you think is moving, but it's only you breathing, or things like this.
So in a way, even though the two exhibitions look very, very different, it occurred to me they're both about the same question that you mentioned, like how can we be together? What does it mean to be together? And I realized when Thomas gave his historical overview, I think one of the things that distinguishes retrospective and maybe your work in general is the interest in conversation and in talking. And your dancers, they perform, but they also speak. Like when you come into the room, someone approaches you and starts a conversation that gets interrupted, but you know, by the time you make it into the different room, depends on who you are. You can also just turn around and leave. That's perfectly fine. And that doesn't disrupt the piece or the show. But you want to create space for conversation.
Well, the first time I used conversation, actually for a piece, was Product of Circumstances I did in 1999, and it was made in the form of a lecture, using this form for the fact that it also allows an after talk, usually, and I was interested in this because this moment of conversation can only be done in this moment. It cannot be scripted, so it has it point at the situation. You are there, I am here, and actually what we can do is we can talk together, which is something that I cannot plan, I cannot script. And in this moment, there is another relationship to oneself, and I think for the spectator as much as for myself. And that's what I use also in this exhibition, but also in the new work I just did also for an exhibition, which is involving again conversation between the performer and the visitor, because until now it's the only way I've found to insist on the subject that is there and that makes the difference by not being an object. If I am performing in a space and do the same movement and ask someone to replace me and do the same movement, I make this relationship, like you say, to sculpture. Like that's I think what Tino Segal brought in with this piece, instead of allowing, by wanting to show this potential or this possibility. And what I miss there, what it creates as a necessity for me, is what actually makes the difference is that these people can react. If I kick him in the ass, then something will happen. And as the desire is, for me, is not to ask a visitor to kick the performer in the ass. The only way I found to point at this possibility is that someone comes to you and say, "Hello, my name is this, and I will show you this," or say something else that is not scripted, and then make this possibility to insist on this is the present, and we cannot totally plan it, although the situation is totally choreographed and planned.
To me, that's quite radical about the way in which people can interact, is the fact that the performers inside of the work have their own kind of authorship, which I think is really particular. In addition to you being the author and being able to kind of map out a retrospective, there's an incredible amount of space and latitude given to just the pleasures of, interacting with performers that are their own makers. One question I had for you, Xavier, was around why an exhibition? One could argue that exhibitions at this point are, tied with a certain type of maybe conservatism, that, curatorial practice has moved to research and residencies and organizing programs like this instead of the kind of exhibition format. So for all of us, including yourself, why did that genre speak to you as opposed to a festival format or something that might exist in a kind of publication, or any of the other ways that you might have worked before?
Because an exhibition is not a program. So a festival is a program. At 3 is this, at 4 is this. So and the exhibition allows this to the coexistence of things that normally cannot coexist. That's what you do when you put painting in the same room. It seems boring maybe for you because that's the practice you do. I think it's not. I think it's very exciting because of this possibility. And this juxtaposition, or this coexistence of things in the same room for the same duration, is something that is possible for me in exhibition. Is not on stage. You can say, yeah, but you can put the same thing on stage. Yes, but it's the attention that the theater calls for is the duration. Is not. So it's the development of the from the beginning to the end. In the exhibition, what you are working with is this attention of the human being for now, during the time I want. Normally, with not this idea of program, I have missed something, I have come too late, or I come too early, that's you're always normally on time. So I think the exhibition is also interesting because it tries to challenge, or for me it's a place to challenge the idea of program, which our life are totally submerged by. We have a program. We cannot, or it's very difficult to survive if you don't have a program. And I think it's a challenge, and the exhibition space allows that for me.
But there's also something for, someone who organizes lots and lots of events. And then this exhibition was up for 10 weeks. So for 10 weeks, every day you came to MoMA PS1 and Alex and I were there every day, this performance was on, and it was activated actually by the visitors. And what happened was, like, you know, in the beginning, the first week was a little shaky and weird. Everyone was nervous. It wasn't really working. And then after 2 or 3 weeks, it really became this machine that was very well oiled and functioned. And then after maybe 3, 4 weeks, there was a first signs of fatigue. And then the stories all changed and the movement changed. And you were there every day too. And at the end of these 10 weeks, the show had completely transformed. Yet, when we talked earlier, it was still the same. I mean, the idea and the stories were in structure the same, but it completely changed. And that's from having installed exhibitions with objects. That's the only excitement you get when you install, but by the time the show opens, it's fixed and it won't change. And it always made me sad. And this was like the first exhibition that got more and more exciting and had a life. And I think that was also very special.
The idea that you point to, Jenny, of the kind of livelihood, and that Xavier, in your description of the kind of heterogeneity of time, that you can kind of have multiple temporalities enveloped in the kind of span of the exhibition, seems to rhyme, Carlos, with what you were describing about taking objects with very different statuses and kind of finding some container to put them all together. And as you know, you're describing the kind of life of a thing, attending to the life of a thing, as you guys have all described it. I'm just thinking of the way that all you guys have all described the kind of intimacy of the living and the dead, or the kind of, you know, walking into that last gallery and being like kind of shocked by this figure that is kind of this corpse in a way, or maybe you know, a lounging figure that has this, you know, this ghostly quality to it. And I'm wondering, you know, it's like this kind of zombie formalism against, or like reused against itself positively. And it's interesting that in something that maybe to the public we might associate with like presence, liveness, that the kind of figure of absence and, you know, the dead and the relationship to that is so animated. And I'm wondering, yeah, if you can just reflect on, you know, being interested not only in the history of dance and performance, but kind of thinking about these relationships. Why your interest in that kind of intimacy? If there's a way to think through it or narrate it.
I was thinking before when you were talking about the ghost, and that many author of the artwork that we go to see in museum are actually dead. I have a little anecdote about this during retrospective. It happens very often that visitors think the author or the artist is dead, and I'm in the room, and it brings always quite a interesting answer from the performer, who can choose to say what they want. They can say, yeah, he's dead, and we're very happy about that, or he's just there. I don't know. It's just an anecdote. That's maybe it's come with the idea of liveness as human being come with the opposite, that is death. And I think this dichotomy we are made of and that we produce, or that's also what liveness can make possible. And I tend to talk about it by the difference between object and subject, or the fact that as human being we are always at the same time object and subject with different proportion. We are never 100% an object, even in very, very extreme case where we will be extremely close to this. And this understanding is always in relationship to the other. We're never, we can decide to be object, but we will never be able to be as object as we want if the other doesn't do it. And the same for us as a subject. And I think that's another tension that I would relate to this life, death. So by bringing this, again, the exhibition and the program, I think it's a place for me. It's using a paradox to undo this dichotomy that we are. Yeah, I think we should challenge.
I just wondered, it's curious we haven't really talked about audience at all, and the serendipitous audience that occurs in an exhibition as opposed to a program. And I was so struck when I would be there for long periods of time, and I guess I would say maybe a quarter of the people would like come to the precipice of entering and run in fear. So I'm kind of curious about how liveness actually is frightening.
Might also be the terror of participation.
That's a form of liveness, though.
I won't say, Kathy, that it is liveness that is frightening. I would say that there are certain expectations when you enter an exhibition. It has to do with a certain relationship to what is going to be there, and then suddenly you have an actor, and that presumed relationship changes, and it's the reaction to people to things that are not expected. When thinking about death, I knew that I wanted to do the show when the company was in their final tour, and the thing about the final tour of the Cunningham Company is the same thing with the final tour of Trisha Brown now, is that you see every performance and you're so aware that might be the last time that dance is performed. So every time that you go and sit, in that seat, you're seeing that performance as the last one. So you're so aware of the fact that might not be repeated. You're so aware of the fact that the insufficiency of notation in terms of dance, right? I mean, it's also constitutive of the relationship between choreography and memory. That there's these historical attempts to find ways of notating and the impossibility of notating it. And that is also replicated at the level of exhibition making, right? We have not find words in which to notate an exhibition. And we know that we can show slides like those slides, and those slides have nothing to do with the experience of the show, because when an exhibition is effective, it is about being there. So, audience, it's the doxa of an exhibition. I mean, without you as an audience of your own show, without an audience as authors of the show, there's no show, right? And so, to me, what was interesting about following the Cunningham Company, that it was this the frustration of notation leaked into my own practice and into my own feelings, and I felt that the curator was condemned to be a choreographer in one way or another, and the exhibition was also a reflection on that. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, I was thinking as you talked about that moment, the ephemerality of the dance performance moment, that in a way that that kind of romance with the vanishing present seems to me very different than what Xavier was getting at, if I understood when you said this beautiful phrase that a present is always a construction of different times. Those seem like two different models of thinking about what's happening in performance time, and I wondered if we could explore it.
Yeah, what we do in this piece, but also in other pieces, just using the fact that theater is like this. You re-perform. It can always be the last time, and I think that's not a problem. But we also know that that's the richness of this liveness that is not going to be the same, whatever you try to make it the same, and that's what is interesting. there is a big question of what how to conserve, or I don't know, these works. I don't know. I've not yet
You
decided.
just told me that you were actually asked by a collector
Yeah.
what if he can
Mm.
acquire retrospective.
A person who was asking me, so who bought the retrospective? Did Tate Martin bought it? Did Bobo bought it? It was in French. He just saw it and loved the work. And I said, no, nobody buy it. And that would be a big question, interesting question. Would be interesting. And the next day he called me up and said that, well, he think one should really bring in a collection this work, so he wants to buy it. And so we are working on a piece that will be his retrospective. So taking up the format of that work. So thinking and working with him together about his experience of how he saw it, and to bring this in a form that is thought in a way that he can use it as a collector. And we have to think, and we're still thinking about this, in different situations. Like, does he want to show his work when he's with friends at his place and say, like, I will show you my collection, and this is a retrospective. So then we think about something that he would do in this format, or if he does it at a bar with someone, we say, yeah, I bought this piece, you want to see it, or is down in the garden, and it's maybe another situation where we have to think about, and someone. So we are thinking about these forms. But that's in a way, my answer for the moment is I have to think another work that it would be about this conserving or maintaining. Huh? There's also a little bit the idea behind another work that I do together with Scarlett Yu at the moment in Madrid in a museum, which is based on actions that a host pass to a guest. So and the guest, when he receives this, also gets from the host the possibility to pass it to someone else, so that the work tries to be infinite and can be actually always present as long as you have a guest and a host. The idea behind over the exhibition is that this passing will involve, of course, transformation, because it's impossible that a person pass the same thing, and it will transform. But the other level is that if on a longer term, if a person that holds it pass it before dying, then the work will not die and would be somehow always present, but in a form that is ready to be really very different than it was at the beginning. So I think for now, I like to think this idea of continuity by finding form that will transform in other form, which is a specificity of the life. I think if you put it in a film and you show it, then it's a film about this. It's okay, but it's this. This thing, or that are specific, or that one look for when disappeared, are not there.
I was struck by both Catherine's reference to the gift of the window and Yvonne Rayner's show at Raven Row, and Carlos, you mentioned Philippe's interest in the windows at the PMA. And I think the way I imagine Catherine's is more as a picture, this sort of backdrop, whereas with Philippe's, it was more of a rupture, and it's a sort of opening up of the museum and letting the wind come in and somehow fresh in the air or shift something. But then it put me in mind of the most Duchampian idea, which is the inframence, or the infrathin, which he defined as the notion of the warmth of a seat that someone has just left, or these very intangible ideas of the presence of a body that has just left or that has just moved on. And it just seems like maybe it's a productive way of thinking about some of these questions a little bit, the bringing together of the real time of the outside world with the fictional historical time of the museum. But it's a very poetic idea of different registers of movement, of time, of bodies, of objects, just being put into relationship to one another without any set conclusions. But I just wondered if thinking through Duchamp in particular, if that had led to any other, I don't know, just thoughts about more radical ways of thinking about museums, of the frame of the museum, and also space, because I don't think we've gone as much into detail about space as we should have yet. And especially thinking of Maria's piece here, which just closed, and how radically I think her piece just reinvented my understanding of this building, and how an image could become a body, could become an object, could go back to being an image, but all being shifted constantly by all of those things being reoriented across the different spaces of the museum. I don't know if that was a question, sorry.
But it's always space with time. That's what you say. With the piece of Maria, I didn't see, but I imagine this. What transformed the space is actually the time that is used. It never goes without.
I was just been thinking about audience, sort of responding a little bit to what Kathy Holber says, but thinking about Maria's piece, which I saw several times, and Xavier's, and Xavier talked about reaction and anticipation, and then on the part of the dancer, but also reaction on the part of the dancer. And Maria's piece was very conspicuously about not the dancers themselves not giving any indication of reacting, which left a lot to the viewer. And in thinking about all these various iterations, the viewer, my response to Kathy's thought is that I think viewers are far more afraid of interacting than just live. Witnessing Xavier's performance several times and Maria's, people were very comfortable, to my mind, around most of the dancers. I don't know what you felt watching. But I'm thinking, there's been so much emphasis in this conversation and others here on performance in terms of what you can hold on to and how to document and how to change the institutional parameters for the sake of the institutional thinker. And I think for the audience, the idea that there's some constant, that they have some given through which they can begin to observe, I guess the piece I'm forgetting there is that the artists themselves, I mean, Xavier talked about all the things that he had in mind in the performance, the multiplicity of the time in the space, the anticipation, the reaction, all of that. Those subtleties may or may not be observed or registered by a viewer. And I'm thinking about what parameter allows the openness that you're talking about as a performer and a creator versus what a viewer can actually register in the given time that they witness whatever they're witnessing. I don't know if that makes sense as a question, but I just think that contrast hasn't really been addressed.
Well, my experience with the work is indeed some people run away and literally run away when we go to them, and I think it's a fear of interaction. Yes, but any way of on any reception of the work is valid to me. All the thing I say, or the thing I use, or I think the work works on, and I trust that it works on somehow, somewhere, and it's a negotiation. I think the work really proposes negotiation, and like any negotiation, you can push it or leave it. And I have memory of the work where we see a little bit that sometimes a visitor sits and stay sitting. Sometimes they stand all in the middle, like facing two-face, like in a garden where a speaker would be. Sometimes people walk around. The distribution of the visitor changed enormously during the all work, and each one, I think, find a place which is valid. The running away is I don't want this, and it's actually great to also be able to do this. I think it's a very great freedom. I don't think that people run away the picture in the MoMA when they might have also the reason of like what this is doing to me. I have to run. No, of course not. So for me, it's not a problem at all. For me, this if they understand or. Yeah. Mm.
Described in terms of the kind of desire to hold tightly onto something, and thinking about documentation or archives is also perhaps going back to what Carlos said about the kind of politics at play, thinking about an idea of a right to finitude in the political sense of like certain projects run their course politically speaking, and then they should end and be kind of given the grace for repose. And I think as Xavier, you were describing this kind of moment where the gift is not given, I'm thinking about that also as like in some ways a kind of valorized space where it's like the fall of something can in and of itself be something, in these hallowed walls, I shouldn't say this, but like I think it's that there's a value in that loss that's important.
I've really felt, Maria, with your performance, I think there was also something about your stillness and you almost becoming one object with the museum and almost being absorbed by the architecture. And actually, when I was watching it for a while, how people almost had a desire to approach it and to really, at some point almost in a not disturbing way, but really almost touching the performers or really. So for me, I was thinking also with this thing of being shy and running away, not wanting to talk to the performers, which I also understand sometimes. It's also the sense of the distance, that fausse d'orchestre, that orchestral, that space between the audience and the performer and how that's activated, and also what that does to objects that are displayed when they become performative or when they're acted out. And I feel especially in regard to curating, I feel that that's really the moment, also when I think of Catherine's work, who's not here tonight, where she writes about how to actually embed the narrative of performance into the display or onto an object. I think there's like an exciting tension between these factors where, and here, Carlos, I think sometimes, there is an excitement also with an object or with an image that can then be translated and that can change over time and often beyond anyone's intention. And I think that's really something where the museum maybe has also become a framework for that and why choreographers do the work they do within.
Interestingly, looking at the dancer, the Cunningham dancers surrounded by those paintings, they loved it because they felt that they were danced for the paintings. But what happened was that you would look at the dancers more sculpturally, but not as if not because the gaze would freeze them as sculptures, but you would see the sculptural elements that Merce was working with more clearly, and I think he was at times very conscious of that. So you would see that layer of the work that otherwise might not be so clearly evident, but you also would see a certain performative quality of the paintings, and I think that for those paintings, Rauschenberg and Jones at that time, the performative quality is tremendous. Of course, we are growing accustomed to discuss that in terms of Rauschenberg, and you will host a show in a few months, in which I believe some of those tensions will be productively explored. But Jones is also is not somebody that we would I guess traditionally think of him in terms of a performer, but later I could see the photographs that Hugo Mulas did of Jones while working, and certainly resonate with the performatic quality of the work, which was more clearer with the dancers there. So there was all, as Pierre Wick says, the things leaked into another. That was a consequence of the show. Different, the humans leaked into the objects, and the objects leaked into the humans, and the sound leaked into the light and so forth. So.
You mentioned that Walk Around Time had become an artwork, and this is kind of interesting to me. Okay, because actually, when Walker was acquiring the work, I called Jasper Johns and I said, "We're thinking of acquiring this. What do you think?" And his first words were, "It's not an artwork." And I said to him, "Does that matter to you?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, it doesn't matter to me either." So the question for me is, I understand what happens to these works when they enter an institutional life. Why didn't you use the exhibition copy?
Wait, there was a reason, but I didn't want to use the exhibition copy. I didn't want to use exhibition because the question of copies for the entire set of objects that I had. I wanted to have the object that had the hand of the artist. I wanted to have the things that were closer to the artist. As I wanted to have the Mercy's dancers, because I wanted to, basically I felt that the memory of Merce was in their bodies, as the memory of Duchamp is in the things that he made. Also, when working with Duchamp, you realize how tactile his work is, and I wanted to have a register of that tactility. There was one thing that I didn't say, which is, I made it sound like it was all recorded sound, for Cage, but the show happened. We worked together with Bauerberg, which is an organization in Philadelphia that organized a Cage festival happening at the time. So there were 36 performances of Cage happening all throughout the city, including the museum, including the exhibition space. So there was live sound too. So yes, it was this very basic, trying to work with with the things that were closer to the artists. Yeah.
So I have a question actually based on something I've been thinking about since Claire Bishop brought it up in a talk. It seems that the technique we use to resist the performer becoming an object is talking. And I'm wondering why you think that is so, / is there a way that we could resist this objectification that doesn't involve talking?
There are other attempts especially in that work, but also in another work, which is simply by playing with the distance. So performing close or performing far without involving the talking is another way, I think, and that's a challenge this. But I would also nuance the talking. If I repeat by heart a text, or if I engage a conversation, it's already a different border, and the text can become an object. So I think, yes, this different level, the how to talk and the how the construction of the distance to what you look at. And then I would not even make a difference between talking or not talking. Then the distance actually is what can produce this question.
Yes, I also feel that it's a question of, I mean, it's not so much a question of opposing those things, like the performer and the object, because they are about different regimes of time and different regimes of agency. So it's more about thinking of, the implications of those different regimes and seeing them flow into one another,
Here's a comment over here.
I was just thinking about talking, and wasn't Xavier talking also in a one way when because you said that you did your first time you use like talking, speaking in your work, it was 99. So wasn't at that moment also a way of an kind of an emancipation of the subject, because you do imagine, the dancers as like mute, so the way of coming and talking, like the gesture of coming to the stage and talking, it was somehow revolutionary in that sense. So how do you see it now? Like, because for me, it was somehow, it was the talking as part of your work was important, but also as part of the whole idea of the retrospective, because it was as you were deciding also to use this framework of the retrospective, which is also very specific. It was also asking yourself and asking other, what does the retrospective mean in a way? So I couldn't even imagine like without talking.
Yeah, for sure. And like you say it very well in this work in 1999, involving biographical element and talking to display a certain construction of the subject and the interaction of the subject with the public, which was exactly not what was expected, because I was also in a situation of having made another work involving not at all talking and producing some image, some expectation, some division, I would say, that I would not agree. So I had the need to speak, which is not a revolution in itself. It's just like everybody, like performance with talking is since ages. It's nothing new, but it was that was very important. At that time.
Well, I think it also goes back again to the question that you started with, like, what does it mean to be together? And, you don't ask maybe you do, Ryan, but you don't ask the question, what does it mean to be together with objects? So the talking, the conversation is really important to form community.
It's a little bit like you say, when the presence of a dancer make you look at the painting differently, and the painting makes you look differently on the talking has the same effect for me, and it's back and forth. It's very important that it's not only talking and not only moving, and the question is how this thing are articulated to each other, which is how we are made or what we makes, and this is similar as a
And traditionally, exhibitions relate to the spectator as individual, and theater to the spectator as a group. And I think retrospective really oscillated between the two. Sometimes you were part of a group, sometimes it was just you and the spectator, sometimes you were hiding and no one was even noticing that you were there.
Which is a byproduct of this attempt to put these two sets of conventions on top of each other or against each other. Or then you form other ways of being together, if one could say.
I also want to maybe flip the kind of valorization of non-objecthood and just offer the pleasures of being a thing as another option to take up, and simultaneously the pleasures of silence. And just thinking about Cage, and Maria's work in particular, this kind of experience of watching people come to this, person in front of them and then kind of be rendered into silence, and the kind of coming into a certain kind of silent object that is a space of enjoyment.
I think, kind of going off of what Thomas was saying and what we were talking about with audience, there seems to be, Xavier, what you were saying about the different ways that people are reacting to performers in your work. There's a very big difference, I think,
when people are engaged directly by a performer, which we've seen a number of times, and when they come to Maria's piece and sort of don't know if they're supposed to interact, that's a totally different ththing. Or when they come to theater with a proscenium stage and know that they're not, perhaps going to be asked to participate. I think those are really different ways of setting up a space and setting up a performance, and people deal with that very differently. So coming off of Maria's exhibition, I mean, people tried to participate, tried to engage, were afraid, were confused, sat for hours, didn't notice, chose to sit for 4 hours and sketch the bodies. I mean, there were so many different ways that it happened, and I also think talking about space, venue, and particular audience for particular museums is different, Anyway, that's all, not a question.
For me, the conversation raises a lot of assumptions about spectatorship that are kind of interesting, in that it seems that there's an anticipation of the spectator. There's also a kind of fear of disappointing the spectator. And I think what could be acknowledged here is the way in which spectatorship has changed in the last decades, or 40 or 50 years, and has become quite, maybe even a perverse relationship. And I wonder what exactly that shift is from, say, when Trisha Brown was performing in galleries to this moment we have now, where there's so many expectations and false divisions in a way. That's.
I just wanted to sort of comment again on, going off from Lizzie, that, with Xavier's exhibition, the audience made it happen. Without the audience there, the choreography wasn't started. So if it was a slow day at PS1 and there wasn't anyone coming into 3 Main, and then it didn't start, and the performers would just be in space on their own. Whereas Maria, of course, you wouldn't have an empty MoMA day, but it carried on regardless of the audience. And I think it's interesting how these different relationships between the performer and the audience, and how the role of the audience, they are interacting, but they are also initiating, and I think it's interesting.
Does that at all get to your question? It seems like in some ways there's something about like the producer-consumer as one kind of protagonist that in some ways is about a shift in reception, or a kind of making of a different kind of subject-object, perhaps?
Yeah, I think I'm also just wondering about at what moment, let's say dance and the museum became such separate spaces, it seems to be constantly reinscribed as, of course, the contemporary art situation annexes everything rapaciously at this moment, and that's something you want to worry about. But, why do things have to be separated so, so categorically? What is the moment in time, and for what reason did these things separate so drastically?
I just wanted to pick up on the question of audiences, and particularly MoMA, what goes on here. First of all, the Trisha Brown moment, I think the early gallery moment when the audience was surprised by what was going to happen, the Rubin Gallery, Simone Forti, all that, where they kind of broke up the crowd with the action, and that's probably not going to get that again, because everything's very programmatic and expected today. But I think, being in the atrium at MoMA, PS1 might be a little different, but for instance, when Yoko Ono did the piece and Marina Abramovich was getting people to come up, people don't actually behave in a normal, in a way that they might if it was a totally anonymous little alternative gallery, right? They know they're in the atrium at MoMA and they walk in and, try to put their signature on things or something. So maybe it's a very artificial construct to wish and hope for a particular audience member that might respond to the artwork as it was intended.
I think in an exhibition, you know, it's always looking for a viewer, right? It's just trying to invent a viewer. I mean, the best exhibitions invent their own viewers.
No, but I'm talking about architecture and institutional power and force and people.
But I also think that when you know what I like about the exhibitions is that they have the potential to imagine what the institution should be. I mean, if not, I mean, to me at least, that's a really interesting proposition. You know, that an exhibition is like a little cosmos that actually, if you decline it, it will tell you about what an institution can become. So it's all about the future, and an institution should be about inventing new relationships with people. Right, and so I will be hesitant to talk too much about the audience as something that exists, is here, there's the audience. I think that different institutions at this time in this culture that is becoming more and more performative, and one can talk at length about what does it mean for the culture to be performative. But in this performative culture of which we are participants and accomplices, I think that the institutions are more and more, could be seen and maybe criticized as, different kinds of proposals for future publics.
But I actually think the institution's task, at least when it represents historical work, is to hopefully, if the artist is around, they can manage it themselves. But if it's historical work, they need to represent what the work was about. So I don't know what you mean by performative culture. I think performative is the most abused word in the language vocabulary of contemporary art. But one doesn't want to see someone, coming and trying to do their own strange performance because of where they are. So it's really adding to the work of art rather than the historical representation.
Yes, I mean, there's something that I heard and I really like, and says, what are we going to do? The past keeps changing. Of the future, we know nothing. We only have the present.
I think that's a lovely way to extend our conversation to the dream space of drinks and food, which I hope you'll stay and enjoy. I want to thank wholeheartedly Xavier Leroy, Jenny Schlenska, Carlos Basualdo, and everybody here for being with us this evening. Thank you.